Kia ora, ko he me toko ingoa. I would like to take this opportunity to introduce to you the New Zealand half penny by means of the John Bertrand New Zealand half pennies coin album. When we open it up, you will note that the half pennies were issued from 1940 to 1966. I wonder whether you noticed also that the original purchase price was 5 and 6, which is 5 shillings 6pence. The first issued halfpenny came with Hugh Paget's depiction of George VI facing left, who was the King of New Zealand and the Emperor of the British Empire. In 1940, New Zealand unveiled its very own halfpenny, which was minted at the Royal Mint in London. It has a plain edge for a weight of 5.67 grams. It had a convenient size of 25.48 millimetres, which equates to 1.003 inches. And its composition was 95.5% copper, 3% tin, and 1.5% zinc. However, this composition was only used from 1940 to 1941 and changed in 1942 to 97% copper, 0.5% tin, and 2.5% zinc. This latter composition lasted through the war until 1945, then it returned to its former composition. The reverse of the coin featured a design from Leonard Mitchell, which was modelled by Percy Metcalfe. The design was a hei tiki. A tiki means any carved human figure, whilst the hei means it was tied around the neck. The hei tiki was flanked by a pair of kowhaiwhai, which are ornamental Māori scrolls. The superscription on the back of the halfpenny is self-explanatory. Nevertheless, you will note the lozenge-shaped stops flanking the date. Often missed in the coin's design is that it has 147 denticles on both sides of the coin. Let us look at the next page. The first thing we see is that the front of the halfpenny was changed in 1948. That was because India had seceded from the empire in 1947, which meant emperor was no longer appropriate, and its loss would make the superscription too short for the halfpenny's design. Nevertheless, the pragmatic design of New Zealand's halfpennies made it easier to replace the earlier superscription with King George VI, which was sufficiently long enough to fill the space that the original superscription had occupied. In 1953, the front of the coin changed again. When King George VI had passed away in 1952, his daughter, Queen Elizabeth II, became Queen of New Zealand. The New Zealand government accepted Mary Gillick's design with the Queen facing right, having her hair adorned with a laurel wreath tied at the back with flowing ribbons. Mary did not want to advertise her work, so she placed her initials NG under the bust as it angles down into the flan. Easily missed is the change from 147 denticles used on the front of the King's halfpenny to 112 beads on the front of the Queen's halfpenny. Also, the back of the Queen's halfpenny reduced 147 denticles down to 144. Scrolling through, we're looking at 1954, and then 1955, and then 1956. Coming down, we're looking at 1957, 1958, and then 1959. As we turn to the next page, we discover that the Mary Gillick design was not without controversy. Not only did she depict the Queen as a young girl, but the bare shoulders gave the impression that she was not wearing any clothes. However, the latter was not the main reason for remastering a new die. A correction was required to remedy the original, which had a miscalculation that caused weak strikes of the die. So in 1956, a new die included a shoulder strap, which reinforced the belief that it was necessary to stop people thinking that the Queen was naked. Strangely though, the denticles on the back increased from 144 to 146. Another quick scroll will show us the 1960 coin. Coming down, we see the 1961, then the 1962, then the 1963. We come down again and we see the 1964, and eventually the last coin that was circulated, the 1965 coin. British coins were legal tender in New Zealand prior to 1940, therefore the halfpenny shown has King George V facing left. Its superscription is abbreviated Latin which states Georgius Quintus Dei Gratia Britannia Omnia Rex Fides Defensor Indiae Imperator. That translates as George V by the grace of God, King of all Britain, Defender of the Faith, Emperor of India. The modified front of the King's halfpenny was spoken of earlier. So too was the remastered die for the Queen's halfpenny. You will note that I have written in there something specific to an Australian halfpenny. They were legal tender in New Zealand prior to 1940. I ended up replacing that coin with a known variety which I had recently acquired. That is the 1961 broken neck halfpenny. That didn't come to my attention until I discovered it through the 2020 John Bertrand catalogue. The narrative attached to the album is self-explanatory, which would be best if I left you to read it. Finally, I recorded the year of purchase and how much I paid. What is not written is that I purchased this album from Margaret Eccles when Margaret and her husband Peter were based out of the old downtown shopping centre at the bottom of Queen Street opposite the old Central Post Office in Auckland, New Zealand.